Sometimes it feels like my house has a life of its own. It was once my sanctuary, a bright, quiet space where I could breathe freely. But now, every corner is filled with foreign voices, every breath heavy with chaos. My name is Angelica, and I've spent most of my life alone. My parents died in a car accident when I was just 5 years old. My grandmother became my everything, the one who raised me, who taught me to see the world with love and patience. She was my anchor, my guide, my only family. When she passed away not long after, I was left entirely alone. That loss created a void that nothing could fill. But life went on. Before my wedding, I thought I'd found a new family in Carlos, my then fiancé. We had been together for a long time, and when he proposed, I was sure it was my chance for happiness, for a fresh start. We got married 2 years ago and moved into a beautiful 2-story townhouse I had rented before our wedding. The house seemed perfect. It was in a great location with large windows that filled the rooms with light. When Carlos moved in, staying there felt like the logical choice, and it seemed as if everything in our lives had finally fallen into place. We had love, a home, work, stability. I worked from home as an assistant editor for a major publishing house, which allowed me to manage both my career and our home life efficiently. Carlos was always very supportive and often said how much he loved coming home to just the two of us in our cozy house. "You know what's great about this place," he would often say, lounging on the couch after dinner. "It's big enough for family visits. My parents will love it here." I would always smile nervously whenever he brought it up. "Yes, maybe," I'd reply, trying to hide my discomfort. The thought of guests unsettled me, though I never told Carlos that. Everything changed the day his sister Sarah showed up unannounced, accompanied by her 2 school-aged children, Tommy and Lisa. I can still remember opening the door and seeing them. Sarah was wearing a bright summer dress, holding a huge suitcase and bags full of toys, while her kids ran around her excitedly, oblivious to how their actions were already unsettling me. "Hi, Angelica," she exclaimed, pushing her way past me into the house. "The kids need to spend some time with their uncle, male influence and all that." I stood there, caught off guard, as her children, Tommy and Lisa, raced into our living room, leaving dirty footprints on the pristine white carpet. Carlos appeared behind me, beaming as if this were entirely normal. "Isn't this great, Angelica?" he said, nudging me aside with a grin. "The kids can stay in the guest room, and Sarah can take my office." I faltered. "The office? But that's where I work." "You can work anywhere, sweetheart," Carlos said, already carrying bags upstairs as he rambled on about how wonderful it was to have them with us. It was supposed to be just for the school holidays, but that night, I lay awake, listening to the chaos downstairs. Sarah's kids were arguing over the TV remote, their shouting echoing through the house. Sarah complained about the dinner I had cooked, though in hindsight, I had no idea that this was only the beginning. I couldn't have known that this moment would set off a chain of events that would gradually destroy my marriage. The following weeks were pure hell. Sarah's kids were completely uncontrollable. I had never seen behavior like it. I edited books about troubled youth, but this surpassed anything I'd encountered. "Hey, stupid lady!" Tommy yelled across the breakfast table one morning, his hands smeared with something I hoped was just dirt. "I want pancakes." I tried to calm him. "First, please wash your hands, and second, my name is Angelica, or Aunt Angelica." But Lisa interrupted, deliberately spilling her orange juice on the floor. "Mom says we don't have to listen to you because you're not really family." I looked to Sarah, expecting her to correct her children. But she sat in an armchair, scrolling through her phone as if nothing was happening, occasionally glancing up to say things like, "Kids will be kids," or "They're just expressing themselves." One morning, when I was particularly exhausted, scrambling to meet a critical work deadline, Sarah barged into my makeshift workspace in the living room. "The kids need lunch," she declared, as if I were her personal chef. Something organic, no sugar, maybe some fresh juice and gluten-free sandwiches. Sarah, I have a really important deadline, I began, but she cut me off with an eye roll. Oh, please, she said, as if I weren't on the verge of a breakdown. You just sit at home all day typing. That's not a real job, unlike being a mother. Days blurred into an endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, trying to juggle housework, and desperately clinging to my work. Sarah's kids cleaned their rooms by smearing dirty hands on the walls and tossing food during their games. The worst part was that Carlos seemed completely oblivious to it all. He would come home and relax, unaware of how our peace was unraveling, how our home was turning into an obstacle course, and how I was sinking into despair. As usual, he would say everything would be fine, but I could feel the frustration building and the exhaustion growing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the school holidays came to an end. On the morning Sarah and the kids left, I pulled Carlos aside for a serious conversation. Carlos, we need to talk about what just happened, I said, still exhausted from the ordeal. What do you mean? Wasn't it great having them here? He looked genuinely puzzled. No, it wasn't, I said firmly, pointing out how disrespectful his sister's children had been and how she hadn't lifted a finger to help. I couldn't get any work done, and you didn't tell me what to expect and they stayed, I added regretfully. I saw his face pale. Please don't invite anyone over without discussing it with me first, I concluded, hoping for his understanding. Carlos looked surprised but eventually nodded. All right, dear. I promise, next time I'll talk to you first. I spent the next few weeks trying to rebuild our relationship, restore some semblance of order to our home, and recover my mental well-being. The walls needed repainting, the furniture required deep cleaning, and my work deadlines were tighter than ever. Meanwhile, debts had dangerously piled up, and I also remembered something important about our lease agreement. Carlos, I mentioned one evening when he got home, I should tell you that our landlord is very strict about guests. There are specific clauses about it in the lease. He waved it off dismissively. Don't worry, dear. In fact, why don't we just transfer the lease to my name? Then you won't have to stress about it anymore. We transferred the lease to his name the next day, although I continued paying the rent from my account as usual for the next 6 months. Life finally seemed to return to normal, or so I thought. I started catching up on work when, one Tuesday morning, I overheard Carlos speaking excitedly in the kitchen. Of course, you can stay with us, Mom. We have plenty of space. You and Dad can take the master bedroom, and we'll move downstairs to the guest room. My stomach dropped. I rushed into the kitchen just in time to hear his mother say something with dignity about sewer repairs and the water being shut off at their house. Carlos, I whispered urgently, tugging at his sleeve. Can we talk about this first? He covered the phone with his hand. Mom and Dad need a place to stay while the plumbing is being fixed. What's there to talk about? Without waiting for my response, he returned to the conversation. That evening, we had our first real fight in months. You promised me, Carlos. You promised we'd discuss these things together. I said, looking him straight in the eye. What do you want me to do, Angelica? He snapped back. They're my parents, I can't leave them without water. Stop being so selfish. The next morning, his parents arrived with enough luggage to survive the apocalypse. My mother-in-law, Maura, ignoring my displeased expression, immediately started reorganizing my kitchen cabinets, criticized my choice of cleaning supplies, and commented on the layer of dust on the windowsills. Angelica, dear, she called from the living room, where she was instructing her husband Gaston on furniture arrangements. When you're done with whatever you're doing on that computer, we'll need a proper dinner, none of those silly salads you make. I gritted my teeth, refusing to show my frustration to Maura, who carried on as if it were her right to dictate how my life should be run. I'm actually working right now. I have a deadline, I said, hoping she'd take the hint and leave me alone. She just laughed, throwing a glance at Gaston, who was lazily flipping through a newspaper at the kitchen table. Sitting at home all day isn't work, she scoffed with a smirk. The days began to blur into an endless stream of criticism, chaos, and attempts to focus on my job. I tried composing emails to colleagues while Maura hovered over me, commenting on my posture and telling me I slouched too much. If I sat down to edit manuscripts, she'd immediately find a new task for me, such as folding sheets the right way, because, apparently, I'd been doing it wrong my entire adult life. One evening, after Maura had reorganized the contents of my cupboards yet again, I turned to Carlos. I need help. I can't keep up with all of this. He looked at me sympathetically and said, "You're right." For a moment, I felt a glimmer of relief, but it vanished as soon as he added, "I should take some time off work." Dad and I had been thinking about going on a fishing trip to really bond as father and son. I couldn't believe my ears. This was not what I meant. But he was already packing his bags, as excited as a child on Christmas morning. The next morning, he and Gaston left, leaving me alone with Maura. "Well," she said, hands on her hips the moment the door closed behind them, "now that you're not busy with your little computer job, we can finally get this house in proper order." I looked at my laptop, where 3 urgent emails from my boss awaited my response, then at Maura's determined expression. At that moment, I realized something fundamental in my marriage had shifted, and not for the better. But things got worse the next day when the doorbell rang. Standing there was Sarah, with Tommy and Lisa, surrounded by even more luggage than before. "Sorry for the surprise," she began before I could say a word, pushing the kids into the house. They missed their grandparents so much. We just had to stop by. I froze in the doorway, unable to believe what was happening, as Maura appeared behind me, squealing with delight. "My babies." She immediately hugged the children and added enthusiastically, "Sarah, dear, you're just in time." Angelica was about to start dinner. Except I wasn't about to start dinner. I had planned to join a critical video call with my publishing team. Of course, none of that mattered to anyone. Actually, I began to protest. I have an important work meeting. Always with the excuses. Sarah rolled her eyes. "Mom says you just sit at the computer all day pretending to work." The next few days were pure torture. While Carlos and Gaston enjoyed their fishing trip, I found myself trapped in a house consumed by chaos. The kids ran through every room, leaving trails of toys, dirt, and crumbs in their wake. Sarah spent her days on video calls with friends, complaining about my cooking, while Maura criticized every detail of my behavior. No one lifted a finger to help, but everyone had an opinion about how I was doing everything wrong. When Carlos and his father finally returned after 5 days, I was ready for a serious conversation. I had rehearsed it over and over in my mind, determined to firmly but fairly explain how unbearable the situation had become. But before I could say a word, Carlos burst through the door, glowing with happiness. "This is amazing," he exclaimed, spreading his arms wide as if he didn't notice the chaos around him. "The whole family together. We should do this more often." My heart sank. "More often?" I repeated, but he didn't seem to hear me. "Yes. Dad and I talked a lot during the trip. You know what would be great? If we all lived together for a while, like a real family." Barefoot and with muddy hands, the kids ran past, leaving prints on the staircase I had just cleaned. Sarah called down from upstairs, saying she needed clean towels. Maura appeared from the kitchen to remind me it was nearly dinner time. "Carlos," I managed to force out. "Can we talk later, privately?" But he just waved me off, pointing to his phone screen, where Gaston was showing everyone photos from their trip. That night, I lay awake in our cramped guest room. Through the thin walls, the relentless noise continued. The bed in our bedroom, now occupied by his parents, creaked with every movement. Sarah's kids ran around despite the late hour, and the microwave's hum echoed once more from the kitchen. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. Another email from my boss. The second missed deadline that week. The email was brief but sharp. "We need to talk." My life had turned into a nightmare. I was surrounded by people who treated me like a maid, by children who destroyed everything in sight, and by a husband who either didn't notice or refused to see that I was at my breaking point. The next morning, I woke up early, determined to do something productive before everyone else got up. I headed to the home office, my only refuge in this chaos. But as soon as I opened the door, my heart sank. Sarah was sitting at my desk, my work laptop open in front of her, and Tommy and Lisa were sprawled on the floor around her. Their small hands were sticky with glue, and dirt was scattered everywhere. It looked like half the garden had been brought inside. "Oh, good, you're up," Sarah said without even looking at me. "The kids have a school project due tomorrow, so we're using your laptop for research." "That's my work laptop," I began, struggling to keep calm. "I have deadlines." "Don't be so selfish," Sarah interrupted. "This is for their education. You can do your little typing job later." I left the office and went to the kitchen, where Carlos was grabbing his briefcase, preparing to leave for work. "Carlos, they've taken over my office. They're using my laptop." "I can't work," I said, trying to sound composed. "Angelica," he mumbled, glancing at his watch. "I'm late for a meeting." "Just share the laptop, okay? It's for school." I felt something inside me boiling over. Without saying another word, I headed to the bathroom, hoping a hot shower would help me collect my thoughts. But when I opened the door, I nearly gagged. The bathroom was a disaster. Muddy footprints covered the floor, and handprints smeared the walls. "Oh yeah." Lisa's voice piped up behind me. "We needed a place to mix mud for our project." Tommy said the bathroom was perfect because it already had water. I stood there, staring at the destruction, unable to speak. Somewhere in the house, Maura was complaining about lunch plans, and Sarah was shouting at the kids to bring more materials for their project. Something inside me snapped. Without saying a word, I began cleaning the bathroom. Each swipe of the mop, each scrub of the tile, felt like another nail in the coffin of my marriage. When I was done, I went to our bedroom, now just the guest room, and looked around. My life had become a chaotic mess with no peace and no understanding. The next morning, after waiting for Carlos to leave for work, I counted to 60 to ensure his car was gone. Then I moved quietly. I packed a small bag with some clothes, toiletries, and my phone charger. The only thing I truly needed was my laptop. Sarah was in the kitchen, complaining about the breakfast I hadn't made. No one noticed when I slipped out the front door. No one stopped me or asked where I was going. The hotel I checked into wasn't fancy, but it offered 3 things I desperately needed: silence, privacy, and peace. For the first time in weeks, I could hear my own thoughts. I took the longest shower of my life, ordered room service, and even managed to get some work done. I kept expecting my phone to explode with calls and messages. Surely Carlos would have noticed that I was gone. Someone must have wondered where the person who cooked and cleaned had disappeared to. But the hours ticked by, and my phone remained silent. No calls, no messages, no questions about where I'd gone or why. After 3 days of silence and solitude, I decided to return home. Not because I missed them or felt guilty, but because I needed answers. As I approached our front door, the sound of music and laughter spilling outside gave me my first inkling of what awaited me. But I wasn't prepared for what I saw. The door was slightly ajar, and I entered unnoticed. Before me was a scene straight out of a party movie. Strangers crowded the living room, which was decorated with colorful streamers. Plates of food covered every surface, glasses of drinks perched precariously on the armrests of sofas, and the cacophony of laughter and music filled the air. In the middle of the chaos, I spotted Carlos. He was dancing with Sarah in the center of the room, both laughing as if there were no problems, no responsibilities. On the couch I had meticulously cleaned sprawled unfamiliar relatives, drinking and chatting as if they owned the place. I moved through the room like a ghost, unnoticed by anyone. My chest tightened with anger and humiliation, but I stayed silent, making my way toward the kitchen. That's when I heard them. Maura was talking to a woman I had never seen before. We didn't spend a dime on hotels or restaurants, she bragged, oblivious to my presence. There wasn't actually any repair needed at our house. We just needed a change of scenery. And you got a free housekeeper, too, the woman replied with a chuckle. Maura smirked. Exactly, a free housekeeper. Though she's not very good at it. Always complaining about her work. Can you believe she ran off for 3 days? Nobody even missed her cooking. They burst into laughter, the sound hitting me like physical blows. I stood frozen, their words cutting deep. All of it, the broken plumbing, the urgent repairs, had been a lie. They had simply used me to enjoy a free vacation at my expense. Something inside me snapped. I pushed my way through the crowd until I found Carlos. He was still dancing, a glass in hand, laughing without a care in the world. We need to talk, I said, grabbing his arm. He looked irritated but allowed me to pull him into the hallway. Your mother just told everyone that there was no repair needed at their house, I said, my voice shaking with anger. They just wanted a free place to stay. Did you know about this? He shrugged as if it didn't matter. That dismissive gesture destroyed whatever was left of my marriage. So what? He said. Their family. They needed a break. A break? I exploded. I cooked for them, cleaned for them, while they insulted me and took over my home. And you knew it was all a lie. Stop being so dramatic, he snapped, looking at me with disdain. You just don't understand what family is. Because you're an orphan. The word orphan hit me like a slap. Images of the car crash that took my parents, my grandmother who raised me alone, and her empty seat at our wedding flashed through my mind. Yeah, he continued, his voice cruel. You're just a lonely loser who will never understand what it means to have a real family. Maybe if you did, you wouldn't be such a selfish bitch. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Without another word, I went to what used to be our bedroom and began packing my things. The party continued as if nothing had happened. No one tried to stop me, not even Carlos. When I returned to the hotel, I sat on the bed, hands trembling, and opened my laptop to start searching for apartments online. My phone buzzed. The screen displayed a call from our landlord. Angelica, Mr. Bikini's voice was tense. I've been receiving numerous complaints from neighbors about your property. My former property, I corrected. I don't live there anymore. The lease was transferred to Carlos. There was a heavy pause on the line. Yes, well, he continued, the neighbors are reporting loud parties, excessive noise at all hours, children running in communal areas, and multiple unauthorized occupants. That sounds awful, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. But as I said, it's no longer my responsibility. Mr. Bikini sighed deeply, his voice strained but maintaining a professional edge. I want you to know that I'll have to take the strictest measures allowed under the lease agreement, Mr. Bikini said firmly. I'm calling you out of respect because you were a good tenant for a long time. I appreciate that, Mr. Bikini, I replied calmly, suppressing a wry smile. But you'll need to discuss this with Carlos. He's now the sole person responsible for the lease. After I hung up, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, a burden I'd carried for far too long. I didn't bother warning Carlos about the call. Let him deal with the consequences of his choices. The next day, I found a small but cozy studio apartment in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of town. The landlord, a kind elderly woman who lived on the floor below, was a retired teacher. She was delighted to learn that I worked from home. "It's nice to have someone around during the day," she said with a smile. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night without being woken by the sound of a microwave or the stomping of children's feet. Silence wrapped around me, and I finally felt safe. I took long, hot baths, ordered food delivery, and worked by the window, watching the peaceful street below. It felt like the beginning of a new life. But 2 weeks into my tranquil existence, a phone call shattered my peace. It was Carlos. "Angelica, we're in serious trouble," he blurted out without so much as a greeting. "Bikini came by today. He's demanding double rent and some penalties." I listened silently, continuing to type on my document. "You knew it was against the lease to throw parties and invite so many guests. Why didn't you tell me?" Carlos's voice grew louder. "I did," I replied calmly. "More than once. You just didn't want to listen." "Well, I didn't read everything when we transferred the lease to my name," he muttered. "Look, can you talk to Bikini? He respects you. Maybe you can explain." I stopped him before he could continue. "Explain what?" "That you violated every condition of the lease? That you turned our home into a hotel for your family? That you ignored all the warnings?" "No, Carlos. But Mom and Dad already got fined for the noise. Sarah's kids were running through the hallways at midnight, and the neighbors called the police. We need your help, Angelica. You've always been the one who could fix things." I thought of all the times I had fixed their messes, cleaned up, endured the insults, tolerated the noise and chaos. "No," I said firmly. "What do you mean, no?" He sounded genuinely shocked. "I mean that you have your big family. The ones who, as you put it, understand what it means to have a real family. Let them help you. Goodbye, Carlos." I hung up, turned off my phone, and returned to my work. For the first time in a long while, I felt light. Sometimes I even smiled, knowing that karma didn't need my help. The next day, Carlos called again. His name flashed on the screen, and I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. "They're gone," he said without any introduction. "Mom, Dad, Sarah, the kids, they've all left. Come home, Angelica. We can fix this, go back to how it was." I almost laughed at the absurdity of his proposal. Go back to how it was? As if the past few months could be erased like pencil marks on a wall. "There's no going back, Carlos," I replied coldly. "Please," his voice cracked. "Bikini is demanding so much money. Maybe we could split the costs. The penalties, the double rent. I can't afford this on my own." I paused, but only to solidify my resolve. "No, Carlos," I said steadily. "This is no longer my problem." I ended the call, took a deep breath, and returned to my new life. I laughed, sharp and bitter, the sound surprising even me. "Oh, now you want to split things fairly?" I said aloud, sarcasm dripping from every word. Where was this sense of fairness when I was cooking and cleaning for you and your family? When they took over my office, my home, my life? Carlos began to speak, but I cut him off. "What about your great, close-knit family? Your real family? Surely, they'll help you pay. After all, I'm just a lonely orphan who, as you said, doesn't understand family values. Remember?" He was silent. Perhaps for the first time, he realized how hollow his excuses sounded. A week later, I heard from our mutual friend, Amy, that Mr. Bikini had finally evicted Carlos. She told me how he stood on his parents' doorstep with his bags, but they refused to let him in. The irony was almost poetic. The very real family he had fought so hard to defend had suddenly turned their backs on him. Carlos's final call came as I was finishing dinner in my small but cozy apartment. My divorce papers, filed that morning, lay on the coffee table. "Please, Angelica," he began, his voice rough as if trying to convey desperation. "I've lost everything, the house, the family. I made a mistake. We could start over. I've learned my lesson." I looked around. My apartment was quiet. My laptop sat on the desk, exactly where I had left it. My coffee mug was precisely where I had placed it that morning. There was no chaos, no mess, no loud voices or unwelcome traces of anyone else in my space. This was my home, and it contained only what I had chosen. "You're right about one thing, Carlos," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You did lose everything. But you lost it yourself, one choice at a time. Every time you chose your family over our marriage, ignored my feelings, watched them treat me disrespectfully, and did nothing." I paused before continuing. "I've already filed for divorce. No, this isn't up for discussion. You've shown me who you are and what I meant to you. Consider this my gift to you. I will never waste another moment of my life thinking about you." I hung up before he could respond and immediately blocked his number. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in vivid hues of orange and pink. On my desk lay a fresh manuscript waiting for my attention. My phone remained blessedly silent, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. Sometimes, I wonder what my grandmother would say if she could see me now. She always told me that family isn't about blood, it's about love, respect, and loyalty. Of course, she was right. I may be an orphan, as Carlos so disdainfully pointed out, but now I understand something important. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely. And sometimes, the people you call family don't deserve that title. In those moments, you have to save yourself. That's exactly what I did.